That. All right, ladies and gentlemen, my dear student, today is another day the Lord have made, right? As we do, as we always do, right? We must give thanks to God. He deserves our praises, right? Because, when you look at yourself this morning, when we look at ourselves, let me include myself, right? We woke up this morning healthy, breathe in the air. There are a lot of people now, they are in the hospital, right? For we receiving the grace of God, or by the grace of God, being able to wake up this morning to come here, there is nothing that we deserve. We are not better than those people in the hospital, in the sense that, you know, we have been here or we are here this morning in good health. We need to give gratitude to God by His grace, right? Then we need to learn how to commit whatever we are doing into His hand. Because without Him, there is nothing we can achieve. So, by virtue of that, I would like to commit this lesson or this lecture, if you will, into His hands. We humbly invite Him to give us His wisdom so that we can be able to understand what we are going to do here today. Right. Okay, never mind about this. Right. So now back to business. Right. We are going to take off now. Like I told you, today we are going to discuss your task, which is your ISAT. What is the meaning of ISAT? Here we go. Summative Assessment Task. Right. Summative Assessment Task is a cumulative of what you've been doing right from the first term, second term, third term, just for the year. Let me put it like that. Right. So you are required to demonstrate the practical knowledge you've acquired in the subject during the year in a simulated project environment. Right. And by virtue of the task or the ISET, let me make it categorically clear to you, as an important component of your assessment for this paper or on this paper, you must make sure that you do it properly, right? It's a standalone in terms of the marks, the assessment is 15%, right? 15%. So that means you are going to fight for 85% for your, including your ICAS, which is your continuous assessment in the class, and your external exam. So 15% is a lot. So if you are able to get 15 over 15 here, so that means you will be looking for 35% for you to get the required pass mark of 50%, right? So take it serious. And it's not something that is difficult, right? And make sure that you hand in on time, right? At this point in time, we don't have the hard copies, but don't wait till then. So that is the more reason why I'm using this type of, or using this system, this methodology to explain to you beforehand. And I've already sent it to you via your WhatsApp group, right? And if there's a way you can be able to print out on your own, I will appreciate it. When you go to the computer lab, you try to print it out, right? It's not a lot of pages. I will tell you what to print, not everything, right? Because when you see the document that I sent, it's inclusive of task one, task two, right? Then what you need to focus on at this point in time is the ISET. You've done your task one. Unless you are still owing task one or task two, then you With this, you've got the opportunity of printing out by yourself and do what is necessary, what you are required to do and handle. Right. Okay, right. Now, this is how it is. Let me go to the instruction. It contains 6 pages. So when you are printing out, mind you, you print the last 6 pages. The last 6 pages, I repeat. So as it is, as we have it here, it says, this is a practical application task that tests your ability to apply the knowledge and skill acquired in the vocational subject. So the work required from you is an important and compulsory component of your study. That is what I have explained to you, right? Constitute a very fundamental aspect of your vocational study. So you need to make sure that you do it properly and give it the right attention that it deserves. So by let's look at the instructions, the general information that you need to know. Study the task carefully. Note that you must do in your own time to prepare for the assessment under supervision, right? So what is going to do is, or what we are going to do, let me put it that way to be more straightforward. You perhaps can go and gather your information, your data. Then when you come to the class, you write it out. It's easy, right? So note the marks and time allocation per subtask and for the task as a whole. So when you look at the assessment tool, it's stratified, it's divided into various tasks. Perhaps task three, or like we are going to see now, right? You got task one, task two, task three, thereabout, right? That makes up the whole project task or asset task, if you will. Your lecturer will inform you of the assessment dates, times, and access to resources. We are going to discuss about that, right? Then individual work is required for each subtask unless otherwise indicated in the task instruction. So it's going to be an individual basis. It's not a group work, right? You are to do yours and handle yours individually, single-handedly. It's not going to be a group work, as I can tell you now. Then use the student checklist as guidance on how your work will be marked. Like I always tell you, whenever you are given a task of this nature, if there is any rubric available, you must look at the rubric. You must make sure that you use the rubric as a guidelines because it tells you how you are going to be assessed. Right. So it's very important to make use of the rubric. You can call it the rubric or the checklist if you like. It's the same thing. It's just a matter of nomenclature, use of language. Right. Then reference all information sources, i.e., internet, books, magazines, articles, city correctly. So where you need to reference correctly whatever sources or wherever sources you obtain your information from, your data, you need to reference it to avoid what we call plagiarism. Right? Okay, you know what I mean by plagiarism. Okay. You don't know what is plagiarism. Okay. When you use somebody's idea, right? Without acknowledging where you get that idea from. You are plagiarizing. You are taking that idea to be your own idea, of which is not yours. That is what we are talking about. So when you do that in an academic environment, it's something that is not permissible. It means you are plagiarizing and you could be liable for that, be penalized. So when you take any information from any source, you need to acknowledge, say, this is where I got it from. There's a way to reference it academically, in proper academic writing. Haven't you been taught in LO how to reference, how to do referencing and citation? They haven't taught you. You haven't done it. Okay, we shall come to that. Right. Then beware of plagiarism, of which is stated here. Right? Do not copy and paste information from information sources unless it is a direct quote which is correctly referenced, as we said. I've discussed about that. Then comply with occupational health and safety measures relevant to this subject. What are we talking about? The occupational health and safety. For example, if you are working with a sharp object, you need to take precautions not to get yourself injured. So if it necessitates you to put in some health and safety protection gadget or protection clothes or whatever, hand gloves and all those kind of stuff. Or if it is something that requires you to wear goggle, to protect your eyes from being damaged by whatever you are using, then you need to put it into consideration. That is what we are talking about here. Right. Okay. Are you with me? Then now let's describe the task, how or what this entails, or what the task entails, right? Then description of the task. The ISAT is an evaluation of the project from part one and part two. You've done part one and part two, which was your first practical and your second practical. So it's not an isolated incident or an isolated project. So it's in conjunction with what you have done before. It's a continuation, it's part of it, right? Part one and part two. Then, and should consist of an action plan, what you need to do, the progress report, right? Reporting on progress made, then questionnaires, right? Questionnaires is a document that contains list of questions that perhaps you want people to respond to, obviously. Then lessons learned, you know what I mean by lessons learned, haven't done a project evaluation. There are certain things you need to see what have been done right in the project, what you could have done right that wasn't done right, and how you intend to improve, future project based on what you've learned in the project you've evaluated or you've done. Then you can take that as a lessons learned. We are going to talk in detail about that. Then you need to present your report in form of a PowerPoint. There's a presentation here. That is why you need to start on time. Then you are required to submit a neatly typed or handwritten project as evidence of this task. So, regarding your submission, if you are able or if you are in position to type it, you type it and make it neatly and make it, present it neatly work. Then, if you are not able to type it, then you can write it, right? As long as it's neatly done. So it's also acceptable. Then instruction for the task, subtask one is about action plan. So in terms of the mark allocation, there is 24 marks, and you are expected to do that in 45 minutes. That is the duration. Then what are you expected to do there? You need to draw up an action plan to be used to monitor the goals and the objectives of your project. We are going to talk in detail, right? You must by now know what is an action plan, what you intend to do, right? Put it on paper, right? Then subtask 2, progress report. The marks allocated to that is 6 marks, and you are expected to get that one done in 10 minutes. Right. Then what are you required to do there? You need to draw up a progress report to report on the status of the project before completing the execution stage. It's a kind of a status report on the progress of a project. Right. Then you need to report or you need to focus if you will, on the following actual resources used, right? When you are formulating your or compiling your report, let me put it that way. Your report should include the actual resources that have been used. Depends on your project, your respective project. You got your project that you identified in your part one and part two. So that project now you look at it as if the project is ongoing. Now it get to a point whereby you need to submit a progress report in terms of the status of the project. So you need to focus on one, the actual resources that have been expended, then the deliverables completed, as well as the deliverables that are outstanding. You know what we mean by deliverables? Deliverables means outcomes of the project. For example, like I said, your study here is a 3-year program, which is a project, right? So if somebody perhaps today wants you to produce a status report of your project this time around, I mean your study, right? Then you are, or if you are required to focus or to focus your report on the actual resources used, right? You know the resources you have been using since you started your project, right? You're doing your final year now, your 3rd year, right? Money have been spent, right? Time have been spent. All what have been spent so far, you can be able to give an account of that, by writing it out, putting it in form of a report. That is what we are talking about, right? Then, in terms of the deliverable completed, what have you achieved so far? Of course, you've achieved a lot. Do you understand what I mean? Right? You gain knowledge, right? We'll be teaching you a lot of stuff here. So, whatever you've achieved so far as part of the outcome of your project needs to be reported, right? Compile it and then report it in your status progress report. Does it make sense to you? Then the deliverables outstanding. What is still outstanding for you to be achieved? Right. For example, now your certificate level 4, you still outstanding. You haven't got it. You see, there are still some stuff in terms of knowledge that you still need to know. You understand what I mean? So all those kind of stuff, right? For example, your project of your study, you can use that. But your project for your part one and part two is not the same. So you need to contextualize it, align it to fit in with your project. Are you understanding what I'm saying? Okay. Now, then subtask 3, you see, is divided into how many subtasks? A lot of subtasks, right? 5 subtasks. So it's a lot of work. You need to focus. Then the question is, you need to design a questionnaire, right? Design a questionnaire with 5 open-ended questions and 2 closed questions directed to stakeholders of your project, right? You know what we mean by open-ended questions and closed-ended. Right. Okay, you need to do that. Then subtask 4, lessons learned. You draw up a lessons learned document in the execution of the project, right? So that is subtask 4. Then subtask 5, PowerPoint presentation. Okay, now like I told you, you see, these are, okay, for the PowerPoint presentation, you need to compile PowerPoint slides, right? The slides should cover the following aspects: action plan, the progress report, right? Remember, according to each of the subtask, right? Then the questionnaire, the lessons learned. So the PowerPoint presentation should have, at least when you are presenting, opening remark, content, voice projection, eye contact, posture, this kind of a guide for you when you are presenting. Then the closing remark. So there should be an evidence for your presentation. I'm going to record it as a form of evidence, right? Insert a photograph, video, stamp, signature, letter, whatever. Okay, here you have the schedule for your time and the mark allocation for you to get yourself acquainted with that can provide the kind of a guidance for you while you are doing your ISAT. Right? For example, the action plan, 45 minutes, mark allocation, 24. Then you got the checklist, kind of a rubric, of course. Then the progress report, 10 minutes. Then yes, 6 minutes for that in terms of a mark allocation. Then the questionnaires. So that is how it is. Then you must look at the rubric, right? As I told you, the rubric is very important. It's what is going to help you. So this is what you need, right? For the subtask one, produce an action plan, right, to be used to monitor the goals and objective listed in part one. So the action plan has the following headings. So you see, it has been simplified for you. So the tasks and activities, you need to list out the tasks and activities, task stroke activities, I mean. Then the assigned team members, then how it should be done, when it should be done, resources needed, and task completed, right? That is what the task completed successfully. This one is for the action plan. Then for the progress report, this is what you need to focus on. The activities completed, right? You just have to name the activities. The activities outstanding needs to be identified. Then the achievement up to date. Then the questionnaires should be designed in this format, right? It must have an introduction. You know how to design a questionnaire by now. Then you have the demographic questions, right? Which are the questions relating to the personal, we call it personal information from the respondent, right? That is where you obtain personal information from the respondent. Then you need to pose 4 open-ended questions, right? Then 2 closed-ended questions as well as the conclusion. Then the document, for you to document lessons learned. This is how it goes. You need to look at the planning, the initiation and planning. What have you learned in terms of the initiation and planning? Right? Then administration and monitoring. You need to look at the administration and monitoring. Then the quality control, the leadership techniques, and yeah. So this is how the PowerPoint is going to look like. If I'm teaching, don't knock here, please. Don't do that. Who's that person? Right? Okay. When this is how the PowerPoint presentation is going to be structured, right? Then you prepare a PowerPoint slide based on subtask 1 to 4. Then the action plan must be on the slide, the progress report, the questionnaire, lessons learned, and the evidence. So this is how you are going to be assessed in terms of your presentation. Your opening remarks, right? Your voice projection, your eye contact, your posture, and the closing remark. So essentially, this is how it is, right? So we're gonna talk more. By the time you start doing it, then of course I'm gonna be with you to supervise you. Then I will be giving you more information in terms of how you need to complete the task and provide you the necessary guidance that I need to provide to support you. Right? Okay. Switch it off.